we'll spring straight in after I cover a couple of short housekeeping things. We decided that it would be great while people are speaking if we can limit movement in here as much as possible. So while we have people up on stage giving their speeches, could you please remain seated and try your best? Of course, I mean, toilet breaks are excusable, obviously, but it would be great if everyone could remain seated and keep hush so that we can concentrate on what's happening. First up, we have Mr. David Olsson, the chairman of Olsson Beijing and partner of Malice and Stephen Jakes in Beijing. He has another engagement immediately after his speech, so we're going to do questions with him before we spring into the remaining 3 speakers for this session and have a group discussion with them afterwards. So, without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Mr. David Olsson.
Thanks, Ed. Well, good morning and welcome. And first of all, thank you all very much. Does this work? Do you need this? Oh, I need to hold it close. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along. It was an unexpected invitation. It was a chance lunch here yesterday. Resulted in an invitation I was having a foot massage in the afternoon. But I couldn't resist the opportunity to say yes to come along to such a terrific and such a significant and important meeting as this. I'm, as Ed has just said, I've got a couple of roles up here. One is I head up Malison's China practice in China, more joined to Malison. But I guess more significantly, I'm also just recently been elected as the chairman of the Australian Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. And that I regard as a very significant and important role for me, even though it's a voluntary role, because it's the start of a process that I think we need to really engage upon really significantly between Australia and China, and that's the dialogue that you guys are starting here today. But I'm seeking to do that at a more business level, to engage Australian business on the ground in China, to start thinking more closely about its role in China and how Australian business can engage more significantly with the Chinese interests over time. So for that reason, this comes together really beautifully. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to fill in time. I did make some notes in the taxi coming up here. Unfortunately, I dropped it because I got a taxi. But what I'd like to talk about, and the theme for today is environment and the economy. I've got to confess, I know a little bit about the economy, probably even less about the environment through macro perspective. But my background is back in finance. So what I thought I'd talk about is some of the significant policy directions that China is undertaking at the moment, how finance fits into all of that, the reform of the financial system, and if I've got time to then try and tease out how that might affect the economy and importantly the environment here. As you all know, China operates on a series of 5-year plans. They've been called plans in the past. I think they're now more called programs. The next one of those programs or guidelines is coming out in February of next year. That's when we'll be fully endorsed, but we're starting to see what it's all about right now. At the moment, it's a program that concludes at the end of this year. It's a program of scientific development, which is really just a euphemism for economic development, but with underpinnings of social development to ensure that there's maintained social harmony in the country. And importantly, in this year's 5-year plan, there's also a very significant focus on the environment and moving forward to a more environmentally sustainable country. The next 5-year plan, I suspect, is going to see a lot more emphasis on the environment. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment in terms of what that means and how the financial markets support that. There are 4 key elements at the moment in that 5-year program. The first is really one which I'm sure you've heard about in yesterday's session, which is transforming an economic growth program program from one which is export-oriented to one which is more focused on domestic consumption. Now, China's been doing reasonably well in that exercise, but it's going to be a long-term exercise because you can't wean yourself off an economy which is underpinned by export growth. An export growth based largely on the low cost of doing business here, low wages, and just low cost generally. China got a real shock during the financial crisis, or immediately after. I think many of us in the Western world thought that China was immune from the global financial crisis. But in fact, what happened was that all around the eastern seaboard, and particularly the southern and eastern coast areas, you found that manufacturing plants which were uncompetitive in the first place, often very low scale, but which had been supplying the Western markets with low cost, low value manufactured goods, went out of business. I was around at the time touring around that area, and it was a pretty scary sight. There were people sort of outside factories, bumping on doors, wanting to know where their jobs were. There was a real concern at the time about there being social unrest in the economy. China, fortunately, has thrown enormous sums of money at trying to sort out that problem, not by not by supporting those small businesses that have largely gone out of business, but by throwing money at very large infrastructure projects, building roads, railways, throwing money at Sichuan to help in the reconstruction after the earthquake, and now after the floods. So that money has now been used on major projects and taking those people that were previously unemployed, the labourers who have gone to the eastern coast to work, taking them back into the central western areas, they can work to work on major projects. So that's actually helped generate a lot of economic activity. The second part, and that overall has continued to sort of maintain economic growth levels of in excess of 9% throughout this whole time. The second platform of the current policy is one of financial reform process. It probably comes as no surprise to this audience, but I'm sure to many others, it would be a surprise to know that China really didn't have a banking system until sort of 10, 15 years ago. It's a very, very short space of time that we're talking about, in which China has gone from having one state-owned bank, essentially, which lent money to everybody for all enterprise activities in China, to one which is now a far more competitive and more diverse financial market. Just to give you a little example of the scale and pace of change and what this means, just an example of mine. I first went as a young lawyer to London in the early 1980s. And I went there at the behest of the firm I was working with because there was going to be a financial reform process undertaken in Europe. It was called Big Bang at the time. And it was the deregulation of the financial markets. And one of the very first projects that I worked on when I started out my career in London was working on this innovative new contract called an interest rate swap, which then moved into a currency rate swap. And these were quite innovative products at the time. They're very commonplace now, but it's just a mechanism for transferring a fixed rate to a floating rate or swap from one currency into another. We take it for granted, it's part of our day-to-day life. But at that time, it was a complex product. We had a team of lawyers working around the clock to draft the documentation, to negotiate with other lawyers on the other side. That all went through, and it's all done. Roll the clock forward 25 years. Last year, I was working on a working party with the PBOC, the Central Bank of China, to draft China's first standardised derivatives master agreement, which is called the equivalent of what in the Western world is called an ISDA contract. It's a derivatives master agreement under which all these interest rate swap and currency swap agreements are standardised. Now, it's all done, but that's 25 years later or thereabouts. And you think, well, okay, China's only 25 years behind the rest of the world. It's catching up rapidly. But the real difference is the fact that what we did in London 25 years ago was based on hundreds of years of the rule of law, of a system of precedent, and an established way of doing things where people understood business concepts. They understood what would happen if one counterparty became bankrupt. There was a process involved. That hasn't existed in China. So to say that China's now put in place a similar system is quite extraordinary, because it's all very well to have a piece of paper that says this is what happens, this is how we contract with each other, but